At face value, the Detention Crew Part 1 and Part 2 are about a group of young students learning to control their powers, gain confidence, and become heroes. But underneath that relatively simple premise is a story filled with religious imagery, biblical parallels, and some surprisingly interesting implications for the wider Rippaverse. One of the central characters is Jonathan Emmanuel Tucker, a former supervillain who is mysteriously released from prison and seemingly chosen by God to prepare a group of 12 young exeps for something we don't understand yet. The Saska sisters are no strangers to religious imagery, as we've seen in their Bloodroot series, and they take a similar approach here, defining not only the themes through a rather Christian lens, but also keeping the narrative closely attached to those themes. I originally planned on doing an exhaustive story and lore breakdown on these two books, but I think what makes these books most interesting isn't necessarily every little piece of lore, it's the themes they're building around Jonathan, the 12, and whatever these characters are ultimately being prepared for. So let's take some time to explore those themes and speculate on what some of those might mean for the future of the Rippaverse. The story mainly follows some students from Wayne Carberry High School and their detention teacher, Jonathan Emmanuel Tucker. There's Carter, who turns everything he touches into gold, Miss Cupid, who's not even a student but can make people fall in love with each other, Felix Chang, who can learn everything about objects he touches and has a warrior spirit dog to fight by his side, Marcus Leach, who can control bugs, and Amber, whose powers at the start of the story aren't exactly explained. And then there's their teacher, Jonathan, who's actually better known as the supervillain Defier. As homework, the kids are told to look him up, and they learn that he is considered one of the most ruthless supervillains the world has ever known, and that no one could stop him. How did a supervillain get involved with teaching a bunch of kids who can't control their superpowers? Well, our story actually begins with Jonathan in prison at J. Sully Ward, a prison built for containing the world's strongest exeps. Jonathan narrates, "Sometimes you think God has given up on you. I don't know who I'm talking to when I pray. I'm not sure why I keep expecting an answer, always looking for a sign." Jonathan seems to have been given that sign when, during his prayer, lightning strikes a nearby tree, a literal burning bush. And to further this, after getting released from prison, he is met with a literal angel. We learn that Jonathan has been given a mission by God himself to protect and prepare the kids for something, perhaps as a way to atone for his past sins as a villain. What better way to apologize for the past than to help protect the future? But the kids also learn something else about him, that Defier was admitted into J. Sully Ward under mysterious circumstances, and no one knows who finally brought him in. In my previous video on Defier, I speculated that given the strong religious themes in these books, it would be rather interesting if that tied directly into his capture and imprisonment. Since no one could stop Defier, perhaps it took a godlike presence like a Michael the Archangel type to stop Defier. This would be a great piece of thematic storytelling, since it would mean it took an act of God to get him into prison and an act of God to get him out. Contrasting to Jonathan is Mr. Wonder, a superhero who has his own group of fledgling heroes. Mr. Wonder shows up with 6 more kids and tells them that they are part of a group he discovered called the 12, who have been given gifts and chosen for a greater cause. So there's this interesting conflict that is developed here. Mr. Wonder discovered the 12, but Jonathan has been given the mission directly. Mr. Wonder doesn't trust Jonathan with the kids or want to forgive him for his past, and is jealous that God didn't choose him for this mission. There's the divide between the good guy who discovered the 12, who thinks he's the proper guy to help and train them because he's earned that right, and the reformed bad guy who has been chosen specifically to do it. An interesting contrast between humility and entitlement. Jonathan, a former villain who doesn't think he's worthy of the responsibility, and Mr. Wonder, who seems to think that his goodness has earned him that responsibility. So, with all this religious imagery that has been thrown at us, I think it's important for us to take a step back and really capture what's being shown to us. God has sent Jonathan Emmanuel Tucker, Emmanuel being the title Jesus himself would receive, to train and prepare a chosen 12, just as Jesus gathered his chosen 12 disciples. And let's not forget that Jonathan's supervillain name is Defier. You know, the thing that Jesus himself did. He defied death. And although all these pieces are here and clearly pointing to something, we are left to see how that fully realizes in future issues. Now, a keen eye might notice that with Jonathan's 5 and Mr. Wonder's 6, that's only 11 of the 12. That final member, Life, shows up during the final fight, whose identity is likely the pop singer Madison Chambers, as pointed out to me by Merc Lounge on YouTube. Check him out. As a quick side note, I don't know if it's coincidence whether the final student's name is Life, while the teacher's name is Defier, but it's just an interesting observation. Life later explains that something about the surrounding area makes them stronger, but their powers weaken as they leave, and I'm pretty sure this is connected to the wastelands. I've spoken briefly about the wastelands in my past video about Shadron. It's an area that was created during the Great War of Separation, and is linked somehow to gifting powers, as we learn from Betty in Catch and Kill. Old Chicago is near the wastelands, as a sign is shown for it earlier in the book, so the location may be the mechanism by which the these young children were granted powers in the first place. However, I'm not sure the powers weaken for every Except who has received powers from the Wastelands, like Betty. She seems to be using her powers just fine in Floorspark, so I wonder if the 12's powers are tied to the Wastelands for a reason, as if it's part of their purpose. And this is where I think we can start speculating. What if the 12's powers are linked directly to fixing the Wastelands? It seems like whatever happens during the Great War of Separation that causes the Wastelands, likely the nuke we see on the cover of Great War Separation number 4, as well as the nuke mentioned in Alpha Core number 3, might have devastated the surrounding areas. Maybe the 12's powers are going to help restore the area to its former glory, the power to create gold for them to sell and pay for the rebuild, the power to influence life to help create plants and restore the environment. I don't think it's incredibly likely just yet, but it's just a neat idea I thought of. The other idea I have is that they're being prepared for a larger battle that might require a larger team of Excepts to tackle. Could it be related to the Hellions and Exclave? Unlikely. Maybe it's related to the coming true war that Alfodder mentions in Norfolka, as I've spoken about in another video of mine. But I think it's more fun to speculate that it could be related to Shadron. As I mentioned previously in my Shadron video, we know he's been seen hanging around the Wastelands, and I like to speculate that he's from another world entirely, and maybe he plans on bringing an army with him. Shadron, however, seems like he might be part of Avery's personal journey, so maybe that's unlikely too. So we don't know what exactly they're being prepared for, but we do know we have to start looking. At face value, these are two relatively simple, all-ages stories about a group of kids learning how to control their powers and become heroes. But underneath that, there's a much more deliberate story being told. We have Jonathan, a former supervillain who is seemingly given a mission directly by God. We have the 12 who are chosen for some unknown purpose. We have the repeated imagery of Christianity, Jonathan's name, Defier, and the very deliberate parallel to Christ and his 12 disciples. And then we have life and the revelation that their powers seem to be connected in some way to the area around the Wastelands. What all this ultimately means, I don't know yet. Maybe it's something we haven't been given enough information to speculate about yet. But I think my favorite part about these books is that they don't necessarily give us all those answers. They give us these little pieces and leave us to wonder how they're all going to fit together. And for a couple of books that are ostensibly about a group of kids learning to become heroes, there's a surprising amount being set up underneath the surface. If you found this interesting, check out the Rippaverse, and thanks for watching.